morning. I would like to talk about a couple of things. One is the Asian market, and the second is the role of the state or the government in improving competitiveness. In terms of the Asian market, Asia has the world's biggest share of population, and it's the most rapidly growing region economically. Everyone is aware, of course, of the big markets nearby, China, Japan, South Korea, but in addition to that, even it goes beyond that. Not far away is ASEAN, which has a population of 650 million people and is not all that much farther away, and it's also growing very rapidly. All of these parts of Asia are diversifying their diets as their incomes get richer, and this dietary diversification has implications for the kinds of products, the kind of food that's being demanded. Traditionally, these countries have been rice eaters, but as they get richer, all of them are starting to eat a lot more wheat. So there's one big potential market. Japan and Indonesia are two of the biggest wheat importers in the world, and South Korea and China are also quite big markets. Meat consumption is going up in the region, and that means a much greater demand for animal feeds like soy and maize. So these are, and the Asian region is chronically in deficit in production of those commodities, just like wheat. Dairy is another big item that, again, much of the region is not suited to produce very well. So there's really a lot of potential for Eastern Russia to supply commodities like these: wheat, soy, maize, dairy products, and also meat directly itself. Now, but entering into these markets internationally are intensely competitive. And so in order to sell into these markets, the role of the government, of the state, in improving competitiveness will be very, very important. And there's several particular things that I think that the governments can do. One is increasing the transport infrastructure, roads and rails and ports. This is all very important. Some other areas that are maybe not as obvious include food safety. Asian countries are starting to demand more guarantee over the safety of their food. And so in order to meet those demands, it's going to be important to have a whole structure set up, not just laboratories, which are of course important, but also institutions and procedures for guaranteeing the food safety of the food that's produced here, or else it won't be in demand. Another important area revolves around environmental sustainability. Again, this is something as these countries are getting richer, they want more guarantees that the food is produced in a sustainable manner. And so setting up certification systems will be important there in the area of environmental sustainability. Scientific agricultural research is something that's often overlooked, but very, very important. The private sector will, of course, do a fair amount of its own research, but usually the research that it does is not enough all by itself, because there's certain types of research that benefit society more generally and all companies at once. So it's not always in the interests of private companies to invest as much as is needed in agricultural research. So a solid scientific foundation and commitment from the government is very important. Finally, one other thing is important is to realize is that the government needs to create an enabling environment to facilitate the private sector investment. Most people don't realize, but globally, almost all the investment in agriculture is done by the private sector and the domestic private sector. Foreign investment is important, government investment is important, but the vast bulk of investment, 75 or 80%, comes from the private sector, the domestic private sector. And so for this investment to be forthcoming, the government needs to set up rules of the game that encourage this investment and, you know, are consistently applied. This is a tricky area sometimes to get right because you don't want too many rules and regulations that hinder private sector investment. On the other hand, if you have too few rules or things like that, you can sometimes have problems, for example, with food safety issues, and you know, a couple of problems there can do a lot of damage to the reputation of a country. You know, China has some problems with this now in terms of the food safety area. So it's a very difficult balancing act to not regulate too much, but to make sure you regulate enough. And that really has to be done on a case-by-case basis. My final point about the role of the state is that I think it's most important to, it is possible, of course, to invest in certain things that are very commodity specific, but what's most important is to invest in the general infrastructure that will benefit all commodities and all private sector players first. So I think the broad general investment is very important before spending too much money on very sector specific investments, which is probably better, the private sector will be better placed to make those decisions and do that investment. So thank you very much.